German pilot's diary. German pilots initially laughed at the American P-47 Thunderbolt until its 850 caliber rifles rained lead down on them. We'll take a detailed look at what happened, who's to blame, and the consequences. Support the channel by subscribing, commenting, and sharing this video. This topic is too serious to ignore. They used to laugh when they heard that strange, deep growl in the sky. German pilots, proud, confident, convinced they ruled the air, thought it was just another group of slow, clumsy American bombers. They had no idea that the sound they heard that morning near Hanover would mark the end of their supremacy and the birth of a new era in aerial warfare. The men of the Luftwaffe had spent years dominating the skies over Europe. They had crushed the Red Air Force, humiliated the British, and believed the Americans were just latecomers, rich, careless, and technically inferior. But on that day, when 15 German Messerschmitts rose into the clear northern sky, they were about to meet something none of them expected: the P-47 Thunderbolt. At first, the enemy looked ridiculous: thick wings, short fuselage, a heavy nose that seemed too big for flight. One pilot joked over the radio, "These Americans build planes like tractors." The others laughed. They always laughed before a hunt. 7 Thunderbolts against 15 Messerschmitts. Easy odds, they thought. But the air, as they would soon learn, had its own sense of humor. The first contact came without warning. The German formation dived from above, expecting to surprise their prey. But the Thunderbolts were already waiting. A second later, the sky exploded in light, red and white tracers crossing like whips of fire. 8 half-inch Browning barrels on each American wing spat metal faster than the mind could count. What followed was not a dogfight, it was a storm. Imagine being there. You dive toward your target, confident, grinning inside your mask, and then the world turns white. A wall of lead rips through the air and your comrade's plane simply vanishes. 1 second he's flying next to you, the next he's gone, dissolved in flame. The radio turns to chaos, voices shouting, calling, cursing, crying, no formation, no control, just survival. The Germans tried to regroup. Their leader shouted orders, but the Thunderbolts didn't give them time. Those flying tractors moved like predators. They turned faster than expected, dived deeper than seemed possible, and climbed back like steel beasts with wings of muscle. One German ace tried to break through from below, but the American gunners saw him first. A single burst, and his aircraft disintegrated mid-air. It was the first time the Luftwaffe met a plane that didn't play by their rules. The Messerschmitt was elegant, agile, designed for precision duels. The Thunderbolt was brutal. It fought with power, not grace. Its wings carried enough ammunition to turn the air into molten metal, and its armor, thick, almost absurdly thick, could absorb punishment that would destroy any other machine. One German pilot later wrote that shooting at a Thunderbolt felt like firing at a tank that refused to fall. His rounds simply vanished into the body of the American plane. The noise of impact was like hitting a steel door. And still, it kept flying. Steady, unstoppable, spitting back fire until everything around it burned. What shocked the Germans most was discipline. The Americans didn't panic. They didn't scream on the radio. They moved together like parts of a single creature. They attacked, covered each other, retreated, returned. Methodically, coldly. It wasn't bravery in the romantic sense. It was something new, something mechanical, industrial, terrifyingly efficient. By noon, the sky over Hanover was no longer blue. It was grey, filled with smoke trails, black spirals, and falling debris. Out of 15 German fighters, only 3 made it back. 12 were gone. The Americans lost 2. On the ground, when the surviving pilot climbed out of his shattered cockpit, the mechanics could see it in his eyes. The disbelief, the silence. That was the moment the laughter died. In the following weeks, the reports multiplied. Everywhere the Thunderbolts appeared. The story repeated itself. German squadrons that once ruled the air found themselves hunted. Their old tactics, fast dives, sudden turns, surprise attacks, no longer worked. The American planes simply absorbed the punishment, then struck back with overwhelming firepower. Let's pause for a moment. Think about what made this machine so deadly. The Thunderbolt was one of the heaviest single-engine fighters ever built. It had an engine so powerful that the cockpit shook like a drum. It climbed slower than the German Messerschmitt, but it didn't need agility. It had strength. It could dive faster than anything else in the sky, and still pull up without breaking its wings. Its armor plate surrounded the pilot like a fortress. Even if it was hit, it kept flying. And those 8 heavy guns, they didn't just shoot. They erased whatever stood in front of them. A surviving German mechanic once described seeing a Thunderbolt after a mission, full of holes, blackened by smoke, one wing partially torn, and yet it landed safely. That image spread through the Luftwaffe like a ghost story. They started calling it the Juggernaut, because it rolled through the air like an unstoppable force. Soon every pilot on the Western Front knew the sound, a deep growl that began as a vibration, then became a roar. That sound meant one thing: the Americans were here. Some tried to convince themselves it was just luck, that the enemy was too heavy, too slow, but deep down they knew. Something fundamental had shifted. The industrial war had finally taken to the sky. One pilot's diary, found years later, told the story in simple words. "We laughed when we saw them," he wrote, "then we stopped laughing." His entry continued. He described a moment above the French fields. He turned his Messerschmitt into a dive, only to find a Thunderbolt behind him. He tried every maneuver, but the American didn't let go. "He stayed with me," he wrote, "as if tied to my shadow." Seconds later, a burst hit his engine. His world turned to fire. He survived by miracle, parachuting into a field where local farmers found him. They asked what had happened up there. He couldn't answer. He just said, "The Americans have built something new." In Berlin, officers studied the reports. Engineers analyzed fragments of wrecked Thunderbolts, trying to understand how it could take so much damage and still fight. They concluded it wasn't one innovation. It was philosophy. The Americans had built a plane not for beauty, not for elegance, but for endurance and power. It was, as one analyst said, a flying anvil with the soul of a machine gun. The Luftwaffe tried to adapt. They trained new pilots, changed tactics, even designed heavier fighters. But nothing reversed the tide. The Thunderbolt was more than a plane. It was a statement, proof that war had become a contest of industry, not just courage. By the final year of the conflict, every German ace knew the truth. The sky no longer belonged to them, it belonged to the factories, to the roaring assembly lines across the Atlantic, that could build a new Thunderbolt faster than the Luftwaffe could bury its dead. And here lies the bitter irony. For years, German pilots had mocked the Americans, calling them amateurs with too much money and too little skill. But when they faced them head-on, they discovered that industrial strength could be as lethal as heroism. The Americans didn't fight for glory, they fought to finish the job. One veteran later said, "They didn't fly like men, they flew like machines that knew no fear." And that was perhaps their greatest weapon, not armor, not speed, not firepower, but a mindset built on precision, on system, on unbreakable repetition. Think about this for a moment. The Germans entered the war believing in mastery, the lone ace, the duel, the legend. The Americans entered believing in mass, in design, in production. One fought for honor, the other fought for results. When those two philosophies collided in the sky, the romantic one died first. You can almost feel the symbolism. The sleek Messerschmitt, agile, graceful, handcrafted, facing the brutal, heavy Thunderbolt, a creation of factories and mathematics, the old world against the new, spirit versus mechanism, and the mechanism won. Years later, survivors would meet again. Some German pilots visited air museums, standing silently before preserved Thunderbolts, running their fingers across the cold metal. Many admitted it openly. That machine changed the air war forever. One of them said, "It wasn't just an aircraft, it was the beginning of the end. Not of Germany, but of the age of nights." Because that's what it was, the end of the nightly sky. The time when courage could outweigh technology was over. From now on, wars would be won by those who built better, faster, stronger. It's strange to think that this turning point happened not in a conference room, not in a capital, but in the blue sky above Europe, when a few pilots realized that human pride could not compete with industrial logic. The Thunderbolt was proof of that logic. It was noisy, clumsy, unstoppable, and it worked. Imagine being a German pilot that day, watching the last of your comrades fall, realizing that no skill, no instinct, no maneuver could save you. What goes through your mind? Fear. Yes, but also something else. Awe, because in that roaring beast, in that wall of fire and metal, you glimpse the future of warfare, the future of the world. And so, the story of the Thunderbolt isn't just about technology or tactics, it's about a shift in the human spirit. The day when man's pride bowed before the machine he created, the day when laughter turned to silence. From that moment on, the Luftwaffe's defeat was only a matter of time. The Americans didn't need to outfly them. They simply outbuilt them. Every bullet, every bolt, every barrel of fuel, the sum of an entire continent's power poured into the sky. Against that, courage alone meant nothing. When the war finally ended, the few remaining German pilots spoke of that sound, the low growl of an approaching thunderbolt. Some said it still haunted their dreams, because it wasn't just the sound of an engine, it was the sound of inevitability. Today, when you look at a restored P-47, polished and silent, it's hard to imagine what it once represented. But those who were there remember. They remember the flash of its guns, the weight of its presence, the way it moved through smoke and fire like a living force. They remember the moment when the air itself seemed to surrender. History books will call it evolution, the natural progress of technology. But for those who saw it, it felt like something more. It felt like the end of an age, the day when the sky changed hands. And perhaps that's the true lesson. Every empire believes it owns the future, until the future arrives wearing someone else's wings. The Germans believed they were invincible. Then they met a machine built not for beauty, but for victory. So when you hear that deep mechanical growl in old footage, when you see those thick-bodied planes diving through clouds, remember what it meant. It meant that war had crossed a threshold, that power had become a product, that the laughter of arrogance had turned into the silence of realization. The German pilot who survived that first battle later wrote one final line in his diary: "The sky no longer belongs to us, it belongs to the machines." And perhaps he was right, because in the end, the Thunderbolt wasn't just a plane, it was a prophecy. The prophecy of a world where metal would decide what man could not. And that prophecy came true.